Once upon a time, there was a sweet little girl who was loved by everyone who met her, but most of all, her grandmother, who adored her. She had a special cloak with a red hood that her grandmother made for her. It fit her so perfectly that everyone called her Little Red Riding Hood. One day, her mother called her to the kitchen, where she was preparing a basket of goodies. "Take this basket to your grandmother's house," she said. "She is ill and needs some food and medicine. Be careful on your way and don't stray from the path." Little Red Riding Hood eagerly accepted the task, feeling proud to help her grandmother. "I will be very careful, Mama," she promised, her voice full of confidence. Her mother warned her again, "Remember, stay on the path and do not talk to strangers." Little Red Riding Hood nodded and waved goodbye, excited to go. She set off down the winding forest path, the soft breeze of the woods carrying the scent of pine trees and flowers. The sun was shining brightly through the trees, and the birds sang cheerfully in the distance. She marveled at the beauty around her, the dappled light on the forest floor, the colorful flowers growing at the edge of the path, and the sound of the wind rustling through the leaves. As Little Red Riding Hood skipped along, her thoughts were only on the good deeds she was about to do. She could already picture her grandmother's warm smile when she arrived at the cottage. She didn't notice the dark shadows creeping in between the trees, nor the silent movement of the wind. She was too wrapped up in her own excitement. Suddenly, a rustling sound caught her attention. She turned and saw a wolf standing just off the path. He was tall and sleek, with dark fur and sharp eyes that glinted in the sunlight. The wolf looked at her with a sly smile, his ears twitching as if he were listening carefully to every sound. "Where are you going, little girl?" the wolf asked, his voice smooth and friendly. He sounded kind, but there was an underlying hint of something dark in his tone. Little Red Riding Hood hesitated for a moment, but then she remembered her mother's warning. She stood tall and replied, "I'm going to my grandmother's house to take her some food and medicine. She is sick, and I want to help her." The wolf's eyes gleamed, and he leaned in closer, his voice lowering. "How lovely of you, little one. And where does your grandmother live?" "She lives at the end of the path," Little Red Riding Hood said, pointing to the winding trail ahead of her. "It's a small cottage in the woods, just beyond the big oak tree." The wolf thought for a moment, his mind already working quickly. "What a lovely grandmother you have," he said, his voice dripping with false. "Didn't stop to admire the flowers or take a look at the beautiful things in the forest? Your grandmother can wait a little longer." Little Red Riding Hood felt a moment of uncertainty, but she was a curious girl, and the forest was so full of life. The wolf's words seemed harmless, and she did enjoy looking at flowers. "Well, I suppose a short detour wouldn't hurt," she said. "I will pick some flowers for grandmother." The wolf gave a sly grin as she turned off the path. Little Red Riding Hood moved into the woods, her eyes focused on the vibrant colors of the flowers that surrounded her. She picked a bouquet of wildflowers, bending down to gather the most beautiful ones she could find. Meanwhile, the wolf took the opportunity to slip back onto the path and hurry toward the grandmother's cottage, his footsteps quick and silent. As Little Red Riding Hood continued her journey through the woods, her thoughts were filled with the beauty of the flowers she had gathered. The forest was a place of wonder for her, with its tall trees swaying gently in the breeze and the soft rustle of leaves underfoot. She was so absorbed in the task at hand, picking the most perfect flowers for her grandmother, that she didn't notice the time passing. She didn't hear the distant howl of the wind or the crack of branches underfoot as the wolf made his way swiftly toward the cottage. The wolf, meanwhile, was moving with purpose, his long legs stretching quickly over the forest floor. He was silent, blending into the shadows of the trees. His eyes were fixed on the cottage, and his mind was already planning his next move. He knew the old woman would be alone, and he was eager to take advantage of the opportunity. When he finally reached the cottage, the wolf stood for a moment, considering the scene before him. It was a small, quaint house with a thatched roof and flowers blooming around the windows. The smell of freshly baked bread and the faint scent of herbs floated in the air, making the wolf's mouth water. He had been anticipating this moment for some time, and now that he was here, he couldn't wait to carry out his plan. He padded up to the door, which was slightly ajar, and knocked gently. There was no response, so he knocked again, this time louder. Moments later, a weak voice from inside called out, "Who's there?" "Why, it's me, your granddaughter, Little Red Riding Hood," the wolf said in a high-pitched, sweet voice, trying to mimic the tone of the girl he had met on the path. "Oh, how nice of you to visit, my dear," came the response from inside the house. The old woman was lying in bed, feeling weak and feverish, but the sound of her granddaughter's voice made her smile. She was so happy to know that the girl had safely made her way through the woods. The wolf grinned slyly to himself, knowing that his deception had worked. He waited a moment, then, in his deepest voice, said, "Grandmother, I have brought you some fresh food and warm blankets." "How thoughtful of you, my dear," said the grandmother, her voice soft with gratitude. "Please, come in." With that, the wolf pushed open the door and entered the small, dimly lit room. The old woman was lying in her bed, her thin frame hidden beneath a heavy quilt. The wolf could see that she was frail and ill, and a sense of satisfaction washed over him. This would be even easier than he had thought. "Come closer, my dear," the grandmother said, her voice trembling with exhaustion. "I want to see you better." The wolf crept toward the bed, his heart pounding in his chest. His steps were slow and deliberate, each one bringing him closer to his prey. As he reached the edge of the bed, he paused for a moment, watching the grandmother, who seemed so trusting and unaware of the danger looming in the room. "Grandmother," the wolf said, trying to soften his voice, "you seem to be feeling unwell. I brought you a special surprise. Would you like to see it?" The old woman smiled faintly, her eyes half closed in fatigue. "I would love to, my dear," she murmured, though she could hardly keep her eyes open. "You are so kind." At this, the wolf's grin widened, and he swiftly moved to the bed. In one swift motion, he lunged toward the old woman, his sharp teeth bared, his claws reaching out to grab her. The grandmother gasped in shock, her frail body trembling with fear. She had no time to scream before the wolf struck, overpowering her with his strength. But just as the wolf was about to finish his grim task, there was a loud noise from outside, a sound of footsteps crunching through the path. The wolf froze for a moment, his ears pricking up as he heard the approach of someone on the path. It was Little Red Riding Hood, returning from the woods with her bouquet of flowers, completely unaware of the danger her grandmother was in. The wolf hesitated. If he didn't act quickly, the girl might arrive and ruin his plan. With a swift motion, he pulled the bed covers over the grandmother's body and hid her beneath the blankets. Then, with a final glance toward the door, he quickly darted into the shadows, concealing himself in the corner of the room, waiting for the girl to arrive. Little Red Riding Hood, unaware of the looming danger, skipped merrily along the path, clutching the bouquet of flowers she had picked for her grandmother. As she approached the cottage, Little Red Riding Hood felt a strange stillness in the air. The birds had stopped chirping, and the usual sounds of the forest seemed to have faded away. A cool breeze stirred the leaves, but there was no laughter in the air. For a moment, she hesitated, sensing that something was not quite right. She pushed the feeling aside, telling herself that it was simply her imagination. "Grandmother, I'm here!" she called out cheerfully as she approached the door. She reached for the doorknob, but to her surprise, it opened easily under her touch. It was slightly ajar as though someone had already entered. Little Red Riding Hood felt a twinge of unease, but she dismissed it. Her grandmother was old and could have forgotten to shut the door properly. "Grandmother?" she called out again, stepping into the dimly lit cottage. The room was quiet, the only sound the creaking of the wooden floorboards beneath her feet. She glanced around, her eyes falling on the bed where her grandmother usually rested. But what she saw made her stop dead in her tracks. The bed was oddly still. The quilt, usually neatly tucked in, was thrown messily over the top. The figure lying beneath the covers seemed larger and more imposing than usual. Little Red Riding Hood. S' heart raced as she noticed the peculiar shape of the lump beneath the blankets. It didn't look like her grandmother at all. "Grandmother?" she asked again, her voice trembling slightly. "Come closer, my dear," came a faint, raspy voice from beneath the covers. It sounded strange, different from the usual warm and welcoming tone of her grandmother. Little Red Riding Hood stepped cautiously forward, her eyes narrowing in confusion. There was something not right about the voice. It was too deep, too hoarse, and as she got closer, she saw something even stranger. Her grandmother's voice seemed to be coming from under the covers, but the figure she could make out looked oddly larger. "Grandmother, what big ears you have!" Little Red Riding Hood exclaimed, her words spilling out without thinking. She had been taught to notice oddities, and now she couldn't ignore them any longer. "All the better to hear you with, my dear," the wolf replied, his voice still strained. though he tried to keep it soft and comforting. Little Red Riding Hood took another step closer. "Grandmother, what big eyes you have," she said, feeling an unsettling chill run down her spine. The eyes peeking out from beneath the quilt were unnaturally large, their pupils dilated in a way that seemed unnatural for a frail old woman. "All the better to see you with, my dear," the wolf said, his voice smoother now, but with an undertone of something darker, more menacing. Little Red Riding Hood felt a knot of fear tighten in her stomach, but she couldn't bring herself to turn away. She was too close now to simply leave. As she stepped closer to the bed, she noticed something else, something that made her pulse quicken with fear. "Grandmother," she said, her voice trembling, "what big teeth you have." "All the better to eat you with, my dear," the wolf snarled suddenly, leaping from the bed with terrifying speed. Little Red Riding Hood barely had time to react before the wolf was upon her. His claws reached out to grab her, his sharp teeth bared, ready to devour her. She screamed, the sound echoing in the small room, but it was too late. The wolf had already pounced. But just as he lunged, the door to the cottage burst open, and in rushed a woodcutter who had been passing by. Hearing the commotion, he had rushed to the cottage, suspecting that something was wrong. With a mighty swing of his axe, he struck at the wolf, knocking him back and causing the beast to yelp in pain. Little Red Riding Hood, in a daze, scrambled to her feet and backed away from the wolf. She was terrified, her heart racing as she watched the struggle between the wolf and the woodcutter unfold. The wolf, now badly wounded, tried to escape, but the woodcutter's strength was too much for him. With one final blow, the wolf fell to the ground, defeated. The woodcutter turned to Little Red Riding Hood, his face a mixture of concern and relief. "Are you all right, child?" he asked gently. Little Red Riding Hood, still in shock, nodded slowly. I think so," she said, her voice shaky. "I didn't realize it was the wolf." The woodcutter smiled reassuringly. "It's all over now, little one. The wolf won't harm anyone again." He turned to the bed and, with a few quick motions, pulled back the covers to reveal the grandmother who had been hidden under the quilt. She was weak but unharmed, her eyes wide with relief. "Oh, thank you, kind woodcutter," she said, her voice soft but full of gratitude. Little Red Riding Hood ran to her grandmother's side, wrapping her in a tight hug. "Grandmother, you're safe," she cried, her eyes filling with tears of joy. "Thanks to this brave man," the grandmother replied, smiling at the woodcutter. The room was filled with a sense of calm after the chaos had passed. The woodcutter stood near the door, his axe in hand, breathing heavily from the struggle. Little Red Riding Hood, still in shock, clung to her grandmother, her small frame trembling with relief. The grandmother, now safe, stroked her granddaughter's hair gently, trying to soothe her fears. "My dear, you were so brave," the grandmother said softly, her voice warm and comforting. "But you must always remember your mother's warning. Never stray from the path and never speak to strangers." Little Red Riding Hood nodded solemnly, her mind still reeling from the events that had unfolded. I didn't know it was the wolf. He tricked me." "That's the way of wolves," the woodcutter said, his voice firm. "They deceive and prey on the innocent, but you're safe now, and that's what matters." The grandmother gave a sigh of relief, grateful for the woodcutter's intervention. "Thank you, kind man, for saving us. I don't know what we would have done without you." The woodcutter nodded modestly, his face softening. "It was nothing. I was just passing by when I heard the commotion. You're both lucky I was close." Little Red Riding Hood looked up at him, her eyes still wide with gratitude. "You saved us," she said simply. "Thank you." The woodcutter smiled and gave a small bow. "It's my duty. Now, both of you need to rest. That's what's most important." With the immediate danger gone, the woodcutter left the cottage, giving one last look to Little Red Riding Hood and her grandmother before he disappeared into the woods. The air was much quieter now, the forest returning to its peaceful state, and the sun slowly began to dip below the horizon, casting a warm golden glow across the landscape. Inside the cottage, the grandmother and Little Red Riding Hood sat together by the fire. The old woman wrapped her arms around the girl, pulling her close. "I'm so glad you're safe, dear," she said, her voice tender. "But promise me you'll always be careful when you walk through the woods." "I promise, grandmother," Little Red Riding Hood whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I'll never stray from the path again." They sat in silence for a while, the crackling of the fire the only sound in the room. Little Red Riding Hood couldn't help but think about the strange events of the day. The wolf, his deception, and how close she had come to danger. She shuddered at the thought, but her grandmother's comforting presence made her feel safe again. As the night fell, they ate the food Little Red Riding Hood had brought, and the grandmother told stories of the past, of times when the forest had been a place of mystery and magic. The stories filled the cottage with warmth, laughter, and a sense of peace that had been missing for much too long. Before long, Little Red Riding Hood's eyes began to droop, her body tired from the long journey through the woods. Her grandmother tucked her into bed, pulling the warm blankets up around her shoulders. "Sleep well, my dear," she whispered, brushing a lock of hair from Little Red Riding Hood's forehead. "I will, grandmother," the little girl replied softly, a smile on her lips as she closed her eyes. As she drifted off to sleep, Little Red Riding Hood made a vow to herself. She would always remember her mother's warnings and the lesson she had learned that day. No matter how beautiful the forest seemed, or how sweet the temptation to wander off the path, she would never again stray into danger. And from that day forward, Little Red Riding Hood stayed on the path whenever she visited her grandmother, never speaking to strangers and always being careful, knowing that some dangers were hidden behind the kindest faces. Welcome to the Bedtime Stories channel. I am Emma, and today we will bring you the animated version of The Three Little Pigs. If you enjoy these stories, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more magical tales. Are you ready to dive into the magic? Once upon a time, there were three little pigs who lived happily with their mother in a cozy little cottage. But as they grew older, their mother told them it was time for them to set out into the world and make their own way.
My dear children, you are grown now, and must each build a home of your own. But be wise and careful, for the world is full of dangers, and the big bad wolf is always lurking.
The three little pigs hugged their mother goodbye and set off on their journey. As they walked down the road, they talked about their plans. The first little pig, who loved to play more than he liked to work, said,
"I will build a house quickly so I can spend my days having fun. I think straw will be the easiest to use."
The second little pig, who was a bit more hardworking but still wanted to finish quickly, said,
"I will build mine out of sticks. It will be stronger than straw, but won't take too long to build."
The third little pig, the wisest of them all, thought carefully.
"I want my house to be strong enough to keep me safe. It will take more time and effort, but I will build it from bricks."
And so the three little pigs parted ways, each determined to build their home in their own way. The first little pig, eager to finish quickly and enjoy his time playing, gathered bundles of straw and hastily built his house. It was a simple structure, light and easy to construct, and in no time, he was done. Pleased with his work, he settled down to rest, feeling quite content, until he heard the heavy footsteps of the big bad wolf approaching.
Little pig, let me come in,"
the wolf called.
"Not by the hair on my chinny chin-chin,"
replied the little pig.
"Then I'll huff and I'll puff, and I'll blow your house in,"
growled the wolf. The wolf took a deep breath and blew with all his might. The straw house collapsed instantly, and the little pig ran as fast as he could to his brother's house. The second little pig, eager to finish his home quickly, gathered a pile of sticks and built a small house. It was sturdier than the straw house, but still not very strong. Just as he was admiring his work, his brother came running, out of breath and frightened. Before they could even catch their breath, the big bad wolf appeared once more.
"Now, little pigs, let me come in,"
the wolf demanded.
"Not by the hair on our chinny chin-chins,"
the two pigs shouted.
"Then I'll huff and I'll puff and I'll blow your house in,"
the wolf roared. He huffed and puffed, and the stick house came crashing down. The two little pigs squealed in fright and ran as fast as their legs could carry them to their older brother's house. Their little hearts pounded as they dashed through the woods, hearing the wolf's heavy footsteps behind them. The third little pig, being both wise and hardworking, had carefully built his house using sturdy bricks. He had spent days ensuring that every brick was securely in place, making the house solid and strong. When his frightened brothers arrived, he quickly let them inside, bolting the door behind them to keep them safe from the big bad wolf. The wolf's eyes gleamed with hunger as he licked his lips, ready to feast on the foolish little pigs. Soon, the big bad wolf arrived and knocked on the door.
Little pigs, let me come in,"
he called.
Not by the hair on our chinny chin chins.
The three pigs replied together.
"Then I'll huff and I'll puff and I'll blow your house in,"
the wolf bellowed. The wolf took a deep breath and blew with all his might. But no matter how hard he huffed and puffed, the brick house stood firm. He tried again and again, but the house would not fall. Furious and desperate, the wolf decided to trick the pigs.
"Little pigs, I know where there's a fine field of turnips,"
he said sweetly.
"Shall I take you there tomorrow morning?"
But the clever third pig replied,
Thank you, Mr. Wolf. Where is this field?
"At Farmer Brown's garden. I'll come by at 6 in the morning to take you there."
The wise little pig got up at 5, gathered turnips, and was back home before the wolf arrived. The wolf was furious. Then the wolf tried again.
"Little pig, I know where there's a great apple tree,"
he said.
"Shall I take you there tomorrow?"
Where is it?
asked the pig.
"In the orchard beyond the hill. I'll come by at 5 in the morning."
But the little pig woke up at 4, gathered apples, and was back home before the wolf appeared. The wolf was angrier than ever. Determined to catch the pigs, the wolf finally said,
"Little pig, there's a fair tomorrow. Shall we go together?"
The pig agreed, but he went early before the wolf arrived. At the fair, he bought a butter churn. On his way home, he saw the wolf coming up the hill. Quickly, he jumped into the churn and rolled down the hill. Seeing the strange rolling object, the wolf got so frightened that he ran away. Furious and humiliated, the wolf paced around the house trying to think of a way to get inside. Then he spotted the chimney and hatched a plan.
"If I can't blow the house down, I'll sneak in through the top,"
he thought with a wicked grin, but the wise little pig had been keeping an eye on the wolf. He quickly stoked the fire and placed a large pot of water over it to boil. Just as the wolf clambered onto the roof and squeezed himself down the chimney, the scalding steam rose to meet him.
"Yow!"
The wolf howled as he tumbled straight into the bubbling pot. With a desperate leap, he scrambled out and dashed into the woods, howling in pain and humiliation. From that day on, he never dared to bother the three little pigs again. The first, 2 pigs, grateful for their brother's wisdom and bravery, promised to work as hard as he had. They all lived together in the strong brick house, safe and happy, knowing that careful planning and effort always triumph over laziness and tricks. Welcome to Bedtime Stories Channel. I'm Emma, and today we bring you the animated version of Cinderella. If you enjoy our stories, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more magical tales. Are you ready to dive into the magic? Once upon a time, in a kingdom far, far away, there lived a beautiful young girl. She was known throughout the land for her kindness and grace. However, despite her inner goodness, Cinderella's life was far from easy. After her beloved mother passed away, Her father remarried a woman who was cruel and unkind, and Cinderella was forced to live in a small, dusty attic in their large house. Her stepmother, Lady Tremaine, was a woman with a heart as cold as ice. She never showed Cinderella any kindness, and always found ways to make her life more miserable. Each day, she would assign Cinderella endless chores, making sure to remind her that she was nothing more than a servant in her own home.
Cinderella, have you finished scrubbing the floors? They must be spotless.
Lady Tremaine said.
Yes, Mother, I'm almost done.
Cinderella responded. The stepmother had 2 daughters, Anastasia and Drizella, who were just as unkind as her. The 3 of them made Cinderella's life a misery. Every day they would give her more work to do. She was always the one who cleaned the house, cook the meals, and take care of all the animals, including the cat Lucifer, who was a constant reminder of how little they cared for her.
Mother, I need my dress ironed immediately,
Anastasia said.
and my shoes polished. Cinderella, hurry up.
Drizella exclaimed.
Of course, I'll do it right away.
Cinderella responded. But Cinderella did not mind the work. She loved the little animals around her, particularly 2 mice named Gus and Jack. These 2 adorable creatures were her closest friends, and they would often help her with her chores, even though they were small and couldn't do much. They kept her company and gave her hope that one day things might change. While Cinderella worked tirelessly, her stepsisters would enjoy their time, laughing and making fun of her. They would go out to town, wearing their fine gowns and jewelry, while Cinderella stayed at home, covered in ashes from the fireplace. One day, a royal invitation arrived. The king and queen were hosting a grand ball at the palace, and they invited all the young ladies of the kingdom to attend. The royal family wanted to find a bride for their son, the prince. When Lady Tremaine heard the news, she immediately saw an opportunity for her own daughters to catch the prince's eye.
A royal ball. What a wonderful opportunity for my daughters to meet the prince.
Oh, Mother, he will surely choose me.
The first sister exclaimed.
No, me.
The second retorted. She instructed Cinderella to sew 2 beautiful gowns for her stepsisters so that they could be the most elegant women at the ball. She worked day and night to make the dresses for her stepsisters. They were beautiful gowns, but when they were ready, the stepsisters only mocked Cinderella for her efforts.
May I go to the ball as well, stepmother?
You go to the ball. Laughs well, I suppose, but only if you finish all your chores, and you must find something suitable to wear.
When Cinderella heard her stepmother's words that she would allow her to go to the ball, she was overjoyed. But then she remembered that she didn't have a beautiful dress to wear. Her only hope was to find something in her mother's trunk. She searched through the attic and found her mother's old gown. It was simple, but Cinderella believed she could make it work. Meanwhile, Gus and Jack, along with the birds, had gathered around and decided to help Cinderella. They worked together to transform her mother's old dress into something beautiful. They found beads and ribbons discarded by the stepsisters and used them to decorate the dress. Cinderella could hardly believe her eyes when she saw the result. The dress was now lovely and elegant, perfect for the royal ball. After the 2 stepsisters were ready, it was finally Cinderella's turn. When her wicked stepmother saw her in the dress, she wasn't pleased. She decided to do everything she could to prevent Cinderella from going to the ball. She told the little girl that she had poured a bowl of grains into the ashes, and Cinderella would have to collect them before she could leave. Just then, when the 2 stepsisters saw her in the beautiful dress, they became furious. They ripped off the ribbons and beads, tearing the dress to shreds. Cinderella's heart broke as she watched them destroy the only thing that had given her hope.
This was all I had.
Cinderella whispered to herself. her voice breaking. Her tears fell, not just for the dress, but for the dreams that seemed to fade away with it. It seemed like all hope was lost. With a heavy heart, Cinderella trudged to the fireplace, each step feeling heavier than the last. She knew she would never be allowed to go to the ball, not with her dress ruined and no way to fix it. Devastated, Cinderella collected the grains from the ashes, her hands trembling. Tears began to fall down her face, for in that moment, she knew her dream of attending the ball was slipping away. At that moment, the fairy godmother appeared. She asked Cinderella why she was crying, and Cinderella explained her sorrow. The fairy godmother then called upon the birds to separate the grains for her. Once the work was done, the godmother told Cinderella to bring a pumpkin from the yard. After Cinderella carried out the task, the fairy godmother turned the pumpkin into a carriage and the two mice, Gus and Jack, into horses. Cinderella was overjoyed, but once again felt sad because she had no dress for the ball.
Why are you sad, my dear?
I just wanted to go to the ball, but the two sisters tore my dress apart.
Well, dry your tears, child. With a little magic, your dreams can come true.
Then the fairy waved her magic wand over the girl, transforming her into a beautiful princess with a sparkling gown and lovely glass slippers. The fairy then told Cinderella that the carriage would take her to the palace, but she must return. By midnight, as at 12, the magic would wear off. Then the fairy godmother warned Cinderella,
Remember, my child, the magic will wear off at midnight. You must return before the clock strikes 12.
Cinderella promised she would return on time and left for the ball. When she arrived at the palace, she was in awe of the grandeur. The ballroom was filled with people, and everyone seemed to be eagerly awaiting the arrival of the prince. But when Cinderella entered the room, all eyes turned to her. She looked more beautiful than anyone had ever seen. The prince, who had been waiting for a lady who could capture his heart, was immediately drawn to Cinderella. He approached and bowed.
Would you honor me with a dance?
I would love to.
Cinderella, with a smile on her face, accepted. As they danced together, the entire ballroom was enchanted by their chemistry. The prince couldn't take his eyes off her, and Cinderella felt like she had never been so happy. As the evening wore on, Cinderella and the prince became more and more captivated by each other. But as the night passed, the clock began to tick closer to midnight. Cinderella suddenly remembered the warning of the fairy godmother. In a panic, she looked up at the clock and realized that it was almost time for the magic to end.
Oh no, I must go.
She cried out, rushing to the exit. The prince tried to stop her, but she was already running down the stairs.
Wait, I don't even know your name.
The prince exclaimed. As she did, one of her glass slippers slipped off her foot and was left behind on the stairs. Cinderella reached her carriage just in time, and the magic faded as soon as she climbed inside. The prince ran after her, but she had vanished, leaving only the glass slipper behind. The next day, the prince set out to find the owner of the slipper. He went from house to house, trying the slipper on every young lady in the kingdom. When the prince arrived at the house where Cinderella lived, then she overheard that the prince was searching for the fairytale girl from the previous night, the one he had danced with, and he knew he would find her by the glass slipper that had fallen. The wicked stepmother made both of her daughters try on the glass slipper.
It fits! It must fit! No. Let me try again.
But one daughter's foot was too small, and the other's was too large. The prince was confused, as this was the last house on his list of guests from his ball. Then, one of his servants whispered to him that the wicked stepmother had one more daughter. Then the prince insisted that they call the stepdaughter. Lady Tremaine didn't want Cinderella to even touch the glass slipper, but she couldn't do anything about it once the prince ordered to bring the girl. When Cinderella tried, on the slipper it fit perfectly.
It is you, my princess.
He took her hand and smiled. The prince was astonished and knew that he had found his true love. He took Cinderella by the hand and promised to never let her go. Lady Tremaine and her daughters were furious, but it no longer mattered. The young girl was finally free from their cruelty. The prince and Cinderella were married in a grand ceremony and lived happily ever after in the palace. Cinderella never had to work again, and she and the prince shared many happy years together. And as for Gus and Jack, they became royalty too, living in the palace and enjoying all the comforts they could have ever